On February 12, 1980, in Hong Kong, a worker was working at Lai Yuen Pier near the Xingmun River. Suddenly, he noticed a strange object floating near the water's surface. Out of curiosity, the man picked it up and was horrified to the point of nearly fainting when he realized it was a decomposing human head. Regaining his composure, he immediately reported the incident to the police. Investigators quickly arrived at the scene to verify. However, with such scarce clues, the police found themselves at a dead end as they could not find any further leads from this lifeless head. They wondered, who could commit such a heinous crime? What was their motive? These questions weighed heavily on everyone's minds. The journey to solve the case and find answers would surely be intense and thrilling. Subscribe to our channel to explore it with us right after this. Hong Kong in the 1980s was a place that embodied both the ancient beauty of Asia and the glow of neon lights from bustling streets. This place was famous for Lai Yuen Bridge, connecting the two banks of the Xingmun River, which had witnessed countless beautiful love stories. But during stormy nights, this bridge turned into a place soaked with rain and a vague fear among the people. The sound of rushing water mixed with the rain created an eerie soundtrack, like a warning of impending danger. Or in other words, it was the prelude to the nightmare known as the Rainy Night Butcher. Back at the crime scene, the police quickly cordoned off the area and conducted an investigation after receiving the report. The victim had curled hair. Her mouth was slightly open, revealing 3 false teeth. Both ears still had gold earrings. This detail led investigators to rule out robbery as the motive for the murder. Preliminary assessments indicated that the victim was a woman. The head had been submerged in water for a long time, causing severe swelling, making facial identification impossible. The police expanded their search to surrounding areas. About 200 meters from the scene, an officer discovered a floating yellow plastic bag. Upon opening it, another body part was found. 4 days later, they found an upper torso and an arm in nearby canals. The most notable detail was a distinctive tattoo on the arm, a sword piercing through a heart with a bird perched beside it. At that time, tattoos on women were not common. Seeing this image, the police immediately recognized it as a valuable clue to identify the victim. Wasting no time, they publicized the clue and called on anyone who could recognize the tattoo or earrings to contact the authorities. As soon as the information about the distinctive tattoo was broadcast in the media, a few days later, a middle-aged man came forward to identify his daughter's body. He said that his daughter had replaced 3 teeth to enhance her appearance and had a tattoo of a swallow near a heart on her left arm, just as reported. Based on the details of the earrings, false teeth, and tattoo, he was certain it was his daughter. The victim was identified as Chen Feng Lan, 21 years old, born in the rural region of Hebei, who had moved to Hong Kong 2 years prior in search of opportunities. She worked at a renowned tailoring shop in the bustling district of Mong Kok. She was married to a man named Chen Yongfeng, who owned a small car repair shop. Their family life had long shown signs of rift. Neighbors often heard arguments between the two, mainly revolving around jealousy and unreasonable suspicions from Yongfeng. Chen Fenglan had also shared with her friends that she felt controlled and pressured by her husband. Their marriage was perhaps nearing its end. Based on this clue, the police focused on her husband, Chen Yongfeng. However, when questioned about his wife's death, Yongfeng denied any involvement and claimed his innocence. The time of the victim's death was approximately 10 days before she was discovered. But during that time, Yongfeng was in Liaoning visiting family, with many witnesses to verify this. Therefore, he was ruled out as a suspect. The investigation continued, with exploring Fenglan's relationships at the tailoring shop. A colleague recounted that on the night Fenglan was believed to have gone missing, she had attended a co-worker's birthday celebration at a bar in Lan Kwai Fong. Fenglan drank quite a lot. The last time I saw her, she was drunk and got into a red taxi. Everyone was tipsy, and no one paid attention or remembered the license plate of the taxi. At this point, this was the only lead on Chen Fenglan's whereabouts. But in the glamorous city of Hong Kong, there were too many taxis like that. Finding the right one was like searching for a needle in a haystack. Time passed and the investigation saw no progress. Interrogating her suitors, including regular customers at her workplace, yielded no results. They all had clear alibis. This particularly serious case was actually just the beginning of a series of disappearances in the following months. All the victims were young women who disappeared on rainy nights, times when the killer could easily act without drawing much attention. The name, Rainy Night Butcher, was born from this. The investigative team worked tirelessly, day and night, sifting through hundreds of leads, but still could not find any commonality between the disappearances. The press described the police as fighting against a ghost, a predator who only struck in the dark. Just when it seemed that finding the killer would forever remain a mystery, in August of the same year, a crucial lead emerged when the police received a tip from a resident. Lin Zhenhui, who worked at a small photo shop in Kowloon district, called in a trembling voice, "I need you to come immediately. While processing some photos, I discovered strange images. They look like human body parts." This call marked a major turning point in the investigation. According to the information the police collected from Lin Zhenhui and the shop staff, these gruesome photos were not taken by the shop, but were brought in by a customer. The shop owner recounted to the police that the customer claimed to be a mortuary photographer, responsible for taking photos of body parts for cases of accidents and unexplained deaths. Although macabre, this job was completely legal and necessary for forensic examinations. The owner explained further, "Due to the nature of his work, I always handled it personally. But today, I was out dealing with personal matters, so another staff member took it on." This explained why Lin Zhenhui noticed something unusual and reported it to the police. The police analyzed the photos reported by the shop. Investigators realized that if these body parts were genuinely photographed in the mortuary for medical purposes, they would have to be preserved at very low temperatures. However, in the photos, the body parts appeared completely fresh and showed no signs of being refrigerated. Based on the color of the flesh, forensic staff concluded that the time of death of the victims was no more than 3 hours before the body parts were photographed. This raised a major question. Were these body parts truly processed according to medical procedures? From what they saw, the way the bodies were dismembered in the photos was very crude, with no sign of expertise in surgical knowledge. The forensic department also thoroughly analyzed the quality of the photos and concluded that these were not reproductions of old prints, but photos taken directly from real corpses. A particular detail in one of the photos caught the attention of the investigative team. A small droplet of water appeared in the top right corner. When zoomed in, they could see half of a girl's face reflected in it. The investigative team quickly compared this face with missing person records and noticed a strange resemblance to a 17-year-old girl named Liang Hui-shin, who had been reported missing a month earlier. Immediately, the customer who brought the photos to the shop was listed as the prime suspect. The investigation team asked the shop staff to provide more details about this individual. The shop owner described he had an average build, short hair, deep-set eyes, and often wore an old black cap. He didn't talk much, just came and went quickly. Not wanting to overlook any clue, the police organized a stakeout to determine the true origin of the photos. Around 4 p.m. on August 17th, a man walked into the shop, appearing cautious and wearing the old black cap as previously described. He glanced around before approaching the counter and asked briefly, "Are my photos ready?" When the shop employee nodded and handed over the photo packet, the man checked it quickly and turned to leave. Just as he turned, 2 police officers appeared and asked him to cooperate. The man looked surprised but tried to maintain a calm demeanor. "I'm just picking up for a neighbor nearby. It has nothing to do with me," he said, his tone neutral. The police decided to follow him to the address he provided. However, upon arrival, they quickly realized the harsh truth. There was no such neighbor as he claimed. No one had asked him to pick up any photos. With conflicting evidence and clear deceit, the police immediately arrested the man on the spot. The investigation team quickly conducted a search of his red taxi. Inside the car, investigators were shocked to find a blood-stained rope in the trunk, a partially used roll of duct tape, and a dirty old hammer. There were scratch marks on the back seat, likely due to a struggle. After the arrest, the police quickly identified the man. His name was Lin Guoyun, born in 1955, from a rural area in the southern province of Guangdong. He grew up in a poor family. His parents divorced when he was 7, and he lived with his stepfather, an alcoholic who frequently abused him. Lin Guoyun's childhood was steeped in violence and isolation. Deprived of love, he became withdrawn and difficult to approach. At 18, Lin Guoyun left his hometown to find work in the city. However, he soon got involved in thefts and was imprisoned for the first time at the age of 20. After serving his sentence, Lin tried to rebuild his life by seeking honest work, but his criminal past and societal prejudice made it impossible for him to maintain a stable job. The pressure from failure and the feeling of being rejected grew, making Lin increasingly out of control and resentful towards society. In 1980, Lin was arrested a second time for assaulting a woman in a bar after she rejected his advances. This time, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. During this period, he began to exhibit clear signs of mental disorder and was even transferred to a psychiatric hospital for a short time for treatment, but with no positive outcome. By 1985, after completing his prison sentence and being released from the psychiatric hospital, Lin tried to reintegrate into society and started working as a taxi driver, a job that allowed him to move around frequently and avoid prolonged contact with others. When faced with police questioning about the discovered photos, Lin Guoyun remained cold and completely silent. He refused to answer any questions, maintaining a vacant, challenging stare. Upon searching Lin Guoyun's house, the police discovered numerous photography equipment, indicating he had turned his home into a professional studio. Lin Guoyun lived with his father, Lin Weilei, a frail alcoholic, and his half-brother, Lin Guoqiang. While inspecting Lin's bedroom, investigators recognized that the photos found at the photo shop were taken in this very room. Under the bed, they found an old wooden chest filled with sensitive photos and anatomy books with detailed images of human body parts, especially of women. Among those photos were a few depicting the swallow tattoo near the heart, taken from various angles. Yes, it was the tattoo of the first female victim discovered. In addition to the photos, the police also found more than 40 videotapes labeled with numbers, a red handbag, and a pair of white shoes. Notably, surgical tools such as scalpels and scissors were neatly arranged as if they were frequently used. Even more terrifying were large plastic jars with their lids removed, emitting a foul stench. Upon closer inspection, they were horrified to discover that these jars contained private parts of women preserved in formaldehyde. At first glance, Lin Guoyun's room appeared clean, but faint traces on the floor did not escape the eyes of the investigation team. The forensic team decided to use luminol, a substance that detects blood even after it has been cleaned. Using available materials such as hydrogen peroxide-based cleaners, they quickly prepared the solution. A sense of tension filled the room as the investigator carefully sprayed the luminol solution on the floor and turned off the lights. In the darkness, pale blue stains gradually appeared. The blood stains, although thoroughly cleaned, reacted strongly with this solution, showing clearly on the floor and walls. This was undoubtedly the scene of a brutal dismemberment. Due to the sheer volume of items and evidence, the house search continued for 4 consecutive hours. Lin's father, Lin Weilei, and his half-brother, Lin Guoqiang, were also detained for questioning. Despite all the evidence against Lin Guoyun, he still denied his crimes, remaining silent and uncooperative. Lin Weilei and Lin Guoqiang, when questioned, claimed to know nothing about Lin Guoyun's activities. Lin Guoqiang admitted that his brother was very secretive and never allowed anyone to touch his belongings. Time was the greatest enemy of the police at this point. If they could not find the victim's body or more conclusive evidence, they could only hold Lin Guoyun for 48 hours. The investigation needed to be expedited, and every effort was focused on gathering evidence to prevent the killer from escaping justice. The police decided to divide the team to meticulously review each videotape found in Lam's house. Most of the tapes were inconsequential, but 3 tapes, when played, left everyone holding their breath. These tapes appeared to be filmed by Lin Guoyun himself, which surprised the investigation team as producing videotapes at that time required meticulousness and technical knowledge that few amateurs possessed. The presence of these 3 tapes proved his level of meticulous and horrifying preparation. The tapes recorded in detail the process of him dismembering the girls. Something we might only think happens in horror movies. The height of horror came when the last tape ended, and Lin Guoyun smiled at the camera. His smile was cold, full of smugness, and without remorse. His deep eyes seemed to stare directly at those watching, causing some officers to instinctively look away. With this clue, Lin Guoyun could be fully charged, but the investigators wanted him to confess, so they used a psychological tactic. In the interrogation room, one officer spoke sternly. "If you don't confess, your father and brother will face charges of complicity. Everything found was in your house, and no one can deny that." Lin Guoyun remained silent for a few seconds, his eyes scanning the faces of the investigators. The room was so quiet that the ticking of the clock could be heard. Finally, anxiety flashed in his eyes. He sighed, lowered his gaze, and for the first time, a deep confession came from his tightly sealed lips. "I'll tell everything." Perhaps this confession was proof that he hadn't completely lost all humanity. From here, the picture of the tragedy he caused gradually came to light. On February 3, 1982, it rained heavily. Chen Fenglan, heavily intoxicated, was helped by colleagues to hail a taxi. Many drivers refused to take her, but Lin Guoyun agreed. On the way, Lan could not hold back and vomited all over the seat. Seeing this, combined with her attire and makeup, a deep-seated resentment and prejudice arose in Yun. Instead of taking Lan home, Yun drove straight to his building. While Lan was unconscious, he went inside, took an electrical cord, and returned to the car. He tightened the cord around her neck. The victim could not resist and died shortly after. After killing Lan, Yun carefully brought her body to his apartment and hid it under the sofa in the living room. Waiting until everyone in the house left, he began carrying out his brutal plan. Yun photographed every part of Lan's body from top to bottom, using tape to cover her eyes so he wouldn't have to look at her lifeless gaze. He then used an electric saw to dismember Lan into 7 parts and wrapped them in newspaper. He placed the pieces in his car and drove to a deserted hill in Fotan to dispose of them. A few days later, heavy rain washed the body parts into the Xingmen River, and the head was found, marking the beginning of a series of cases he committed. Upon hearing that the body parts were discovered, Yun realized his mistake and decided to improve his skills to conceal them better. He turned to medical anatomy books to learn how to dismember bodies more professionally. This kept him dormant for the next 3 months before he committed new crimes. His subsequent victims were Chen Yunjie, 31 years old, Liang Shuyun, 29 years old, and Liang Huixin, 17 years old, all killed and dismembered in the same manner. Apart from the private parts kept as trophies, the remaining body parts were dumped along Taihang Road. After the body parts were found and the investigation completed, Lin Guoyun was officially brought to trial on a December morning, drawing significant attention from the press and the public. The courtroom was packed with victims' families, reporters, and curious onlookers. Lin Guoyun entered the courtroom with a cold expression, showing no fear or remorse. He wore an old shirt and looked straight at the judges and the jury without blinking. His defense attorney tried to argue that Lin Guoyun had a history of mental instability due to an unfortunate childhood and a violent environment. However, the prosecution strongly countered, asserting that despite his tragic past, his actions were entirely calculated and intentional. The videotapes recording the entire process of killing and dismembering were presented as undeniable evidence. In the courtroom, these images and videos caused many to shudder and turn away in fear. Psychologists were also invited to analyze Lin Guoyun's mental state. They affirmed that he had sufficient awareness to understand that his actions were wrong and was fully capable of controlling himself, proving that he was not out of control. After many days of debate, the court declared Lin Guoyun guilty of multiple murders with brutal and heinous characteristics, qualifying him for the highest sentence. The jury concluded that his actions reflected severe moral depravity, sentencing Lin Guoyun to life imprisonment without parole. Upon hearing the verdict, there was no sign of fear or remorse from Lin Guoyun. He only gave a slight, cold smile that sent chills down the spines of everyone in the courtroom. Public reaction was strong, with some believing that a life sentence was too lenient for what he had done. The story of Lin Guoyun became a warning about the importance of monitoring the psychology and behavior of individuals showing abnormal signs, especially those with unfortunate pasts and histories of violence. The victims' families continued their lives with an unending grief, but always reminded others of those who had passed, ensuring their stories were never forgotten. Thank you for following this story. If you found the video interesting and informative, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel to not miss future stories. On December 1st, 1986, as the cold weather enveloped Newtown, Connecticut, a strange call was received at the local police station from a private investigator named Keith Mayo. With a worried tone, Keith explained that his client, Helly Crafts, had disappeared, and he requested police assistance in investigating the matter. Keith also revealed that he suspected Helly's husband, Richard, was closely involved in her disappearance. Initially, the police did not give the case much attention, assuming it was just a marital dispute and that Helly might have left home for a few days to cool down. However, as they delved into the investigation, the police realized they were dealing with an exceptionally gruesome and brutal murder case. When Helly was found, only fragments of her body remained. With intense deduction and investigative efforts, this case became the first legal precedent in the US to convict someone of murder without a body. What is the true story behind this case? Subscribe to our channel to discover the whole truth. Newtown, Connecticut is a small, peaceful town with an old-world charm, featuring winding paths that stretch through lush green forests. The town is renowned for its natural beauty, from crystal-clear lakes to fields of wildflowers in full bloom, creating a tranquil, picture-perfect scene. However, despite its beauty and serenity, Newtown was now faced with an unprecedented mystery. Life in this town would soon be shaken by a case that would disrupt everything and raise questions about what truly lay beneath this peaceful facade. Our informant in this case is Keith Mayo, a private investigator known in his field for his sharp mind and steely nerves. Helly Crafts had approached him in desperation, asking him to track her husband, Richard Crafts, a powerful and respected man, as she suspected him of infidelity. For months, Keith had gathered sufficient evidence of Richard's unfaithfulness. He tracked suspicious meetings and documented moments of Richard in close contact with other women. But since November 18th, Helly had stopped contacting Keith as she usually did. He reached out to her friends, but none of them had heard from her either. Realizing something was wrong, Keith reported the case to the police. At first, the police were skeptical, assuming this could just be a family feud and that Keith might be exaggerating the issue. Therefore, after receiving the report, they sent a team to investigate the next day. The first person to be interviewed was Richard Crafts, a pilot and also a volunteer police officer. When questioned about his wife's disappearance, he began recounting the story coherently. He and Helly were married and had 3 children together, but recently their family life had experienced some turmoil, as both of them suspected each other of infidelity. On the night of November 18th, everything seemed normal before he left the house. "We even discussed taking the kids to my sister's place for the weekend," Richard said firmly. However, when he woke up the next morning, Helly was nowhere to be found. He assumed she might have received an important work call and had to leave. As a flight attendant, Helly often traveled to many places around the world, so her being away for days was normal. Sometimes she would go for up to 10 days without notice, Richard emphasized, as if this justified his lack of concern over her immediate absence. At that time, both Richard and Helly had doubts about each other, leading to continuous arguments. For the moment, the police gathered no significant information from Richard. They decided to widen the scope of the investigation to include those around Helly. One of them was Mary Thomas, the Crafts family's 19-year-old nanny. Interestingly, she had quit her job shortly after learning of Helly's disappearance. This immediately caught the police's attention. During the interview, Mary appeared anxious and somewhat reluctant as she recounted what she knew. According to her, on the night before Helly was reported missing, she was suddenly awakened by a strange noise in the house. Initially, Mary didn't think much of it, assuming the sound was just something being knocked over by the snowstorm outside. However, as she learned of the investigation, she began to feel uneasy. The next morning, Richard informed her that the house had lost power the night before. Richard said that in such cold weather, being without heat was problematic, so he decided to take the family to his sister's house in Westport, about 35 kilometers away from their town. Mary did not see Helly at the time, so she asked Richard, "Isn't Mrs. Hella coming along?" Richard only replied briefly that his wife had left earlier. Mary found this strange since their children were still at home, but she didn't give it much thought. However, when they arrived at Richard's sister's house, he left the family there and quickly returned home. It wasn't until around 7 p.m. that Richard came back to pick everyone up. During their time at his sister's, Mary didn't see Helly at all. The following morning, when Mary was cleaning the bedroom, she noticed a large black stain on the carpet. At first glance, it looked like kerosene. When she asked Richard about it, he said it was indeed kerosene, and that he was planning to replace the carpet. Richard's strange demeanor made Mary feel frightened and uneasy, leading her to quit her job shortly afterward. The police noted that Mary's testimony hinted at Richard hiding something, but there was still no concrete evidence at this stage. Helly was a flight attendant known for her kind, hard-working nature and her love for her children. Outwardly, the Crafts family appeared happy with their 3 young children, but beneath the surface was a marriage full of cracks. Richard Crafts was a well-known figure in the community as a volunteer police officer. However, behind this image, he had a volatile temperament. According to Helly's friends, Richard was often controlling and exerted dominance within the family. He was also known for his interest in collecting weapons. Some friends and acquaintances of Hell recalled that she had been physically abused by Richard. She had frequently expressed her fear, saying that if anything ever happened to her, it would definitely not be an accident. Helly had intentions of divorcing him and wanted to end their marriage as soon as possible. Recently, friends had not been able to contact Helly, and she had not shown up for work. When they inquired with Richard, he claimed not to know where his wife was. At this point, the police divided their investigation into 2 directions. One team actively searched for clues through Helly's personal relationships, while the other conducted searches in the surrounding areas, as they could not rule out the possibility that Helly had encountered an accident elsewhere. During the search in town, a large number of police officers and tracking dogs were deployed, and Richard actively participated in the search as a family member. Although the search took place across many locations, all efforts yielded no specific results. When an investigation does not yield any results, it is common for the police to focus again on the victim's close relationships. Testimonies from friends and stories about Richard's threats could not be ignored by the police. With the current leads, they began to focus on Richard as the main suspect in the case. The police continued their deeper investigation into details related to Hellycraft's disappearance, beginning to examine Richard's bank and phone records. Their initial discoveries revealed some suspicious irregularities. According to credit card records on November 13, 1986, just a few days before Helly's disappearance, Richard had spent $1,000 at an electronics store in Newtown to purchase a large freezer and an electric saw. The electric saw was readily available, but the freezer was not in stock and required about 4 days for delivery. This was puzzling behavior. Why would Richard need a new large freezer? The store owner recalled that when asked for personal information for delivery, Richard refused and said he would pick it up himself. 4 days later, Richard returned to the store and transported the freezer home himself. Additionally, credit card records showed that on November 18, 1986, Richard spent another $800 to rent a specific piece of equipment from a local company. Upon reviewing his phone records, police found that Richard had contacted a company specializing in wood chippers. In his conversation with the company, Richard mentioned that the recent snowstorm had caused trees to fall around his property, and he needed a wood chipper to handle the debris. He rented the most powerful machine, capable of shredding branches and logs with a diameter of up to 30 centimeters. On November 19, 1986, he also bought a new set of bedding. These details made the police highly suspicious, as all indications pointed to a sequence of unusual actions that took place immediately before and after Hella's disappearance. However, at that time, despite the evidence pointing towards Richard, the police still did not have enough concrete evidence to proceed with an arrest. The question of Hella's fate and the true purpose of Richard's strange actions remained an unsolved mystery. But there was still a place the police had yet to search, and you can probably guess. It was Richard's home. With this indirect evidence, the police had sufficient grounds to request a search warrant for his house. On December 26, after obtaining indirect evidence, the police were granted a warrant to search Richard's house. In the bedroom, investigators quickly noticed something unusual. Small, discolored droplets on the floor that suddenly stopped right outside the room's door, the place where the carpet had been removed. To determine if it was blood, an investigator quickly mixed luminol using available materials such as hydrogen peroxide-based cleaners. They carefully sprayed the solution on the floor and turned off the lights. In the darkness, the investigators held their breath as faint blue glows appeared on the floor, revealing blood traces that had been meticulously cleaned. Notably, there was a large blood stain where the carpet had previously been placed, explaining the oil-like stain that the nanny had observed earlier. This sign made investigators believe that Helle might have been murdered in her bedroom, and then her body was dragged to the spot where the carpet had been. Her blood seeped through the carpet, leaving a black mark on the floor. In the bathroom, the police also found several large towels hanging. The samples tested also quickly showed a reaction to blood. With these discoveries, the police concluded that an attack had likely occurred and that Helle might have been killed. However, her body had still not been found, and under U.S. law, a suspect could not be convicted of murder without the victim's body. When the investigation was nearing a dead end, a breakthrough occurred when Joseph Hine, an environmental worker near the river area, arrived at the police station. He appeared tense and recounted an event he had witnessed early on the morning of November 20th, 1986, just a few days after Helle was reported missing. Hine explained that around 3:30 a.m. that morning, while clearing snow from the road in terrible weather, he saw a man dragging a large wood chipper and stopping by the Farmington riverbank. The conditions were harsh, with strong winds and heavy snowfall. Hine found it very strange, as the weather was not suitable for outdoor work, especially with a large piece of equipment like a wood chipper. However, at that moment, he did not report it immediately, thinking the man might be clearing fallen trees from the snowstorm. When Helle's disappearance became publicized through the media and the police delved deeper into the case, Hine realized the man he saw that night might be related to the case. He immediately went to the police station to provide detailed information. The police provided Hine with several identification photos and asked him if he recognized anyone. Hine scanned through each photo until his gaze stopped on a familiar face. "That's the one," Hine said confidently as he pointed to Richard Crafts's picture. Joseph Hine's identification marked a turning point in the investigation. The police recalled that Richard had rented a wood chipper from a local company, and the pieces of the puzzle started coming together. The police inferred that, after killing Helle, Richard had hidden her body in a freezer, then brought it outside and used the wood chipper to destroy all evidence. If so, it would be nearly impossible for anyone to find Helle. To verify the hypothesis that Richard used a wood chipper to dispose of Helle's body, the police decided to conduct an experiment. They rented a wood chipper similar to the one Richard had rented and purchased a pig for the test. The police and forensic team conducted the experiment in a controlled area. When the frozen pig was fed into the machine, it worked very efficiently. The pig's body was shredded into small pieces of flesh and bone, with some parts flung nearly 5 meters away. This experiment demonstrated that a human body could indeed be destroyed by a wood chipper if it were frozen. Based on the results of the experiment, the police immediately organized a search along the Farmington River, where Joseph Hine had seen Richard using the wood chipper. 2 search teams were deployed, one of divers, scouring the riverbed, and another trawling near the riverbank, looking for even the smallest traces. The search continued in harsh conditions, with mud and freezing water. After 2 days of intense and hopeful work, the investigators found a series of grim evidence. First, they discovered over 2,600 small bone fragments, pieces of wrinkled and discolored skin due to prolonged exposure to cold water, a fingernail, 2 teeth, and some hair. All were too small to reconstruct into any complete part of a body. Notably, among the retrieved items, police found a chainsaw at the bottom of the river. The serial number on the saw matched the purchase receipt Richard had from earlier. At that time, DNA analysis technology had not yet been developed, so the identification of body fragments had to be done manually and meticulously. The police and forensic team began their work by comparing each bone fragment, hair strand, and tooth with Hellycraft's dental records and identifying features. Each specimen was examined under a microscope, and minute details such as bone structure and unique features on the teeth were carefully matched. A team of dental experts was brought in to compare the isolated teeth with Hella's dental records. The characteristics of the found teeth showed significant similarity to the victim, but for a formal conclusion, they needed to combine additional evidence. The long hairs discovered matched the color and length of Hella's distinctive hair. To be certain, these hairs were compared with samples from her personal comb and hairbrush, and the results were a complete match. The bone samples were also carefully compared in terms of size, thickness, and shape, and the results aligned with Hella's age, gender, and height. The police's hypothesis became clearer than ever. They believed that Richard had premeditated his wife's murder due to marital conflicts and the threats Hella had shared with her friends. The most likely scenario was that Richard unexpectedly struck Helly on the head in the bedroom, then dragged her onto the carpet and moved her into the bathroom to dismember her with an electric saw. The purchase of the large freezer indicated that Richard meticulously planned this act. He could have stored her body in the freezer for a time to avoid any smells or unusual signs in the house, and the freezer also made it possible for the wood chipper to function optimally, as it works best with solid materials. On November 18th, when Richard rented the wood chipper, his disposal plan was set in motion. Amidst the heavy snow and blizzard, he took the frozen body parts to the riverbank and used the wood chipper to shred the remains, intending to eliminate all traces of Helle. Despite facing a series of incriminating evidence, Richard Crafts remained steadfast in denying all allegations. He maintained a cold demeanor and insisted he had no involvement in Hella's disappearance. The investigation and the legal case preparation spanned months, with circumstantial evidence like blood stains in the house, witness testimonies, and the rented wood chipper, all piecing together the brutal story of Helle's death. On May 13, 1987, Richard Crafts was officially arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The case quickly garnered public attention, not only for the brutal nature of the crime, but because it was the first in the U.S. to be tried without a complete body of the victim. The trial began on May 21, 1988, at the Danbury County Court, Connecticut. Richard entered the courtroom with a cold gaze, occasionally glancing at the jury but showing no emotion. The prosecutor presented each piece of circumstantial evidence, from the blood stains on the carpet and floor, the large freezer purchase, to the rented wood chipper. They argued that every detail pointed to Richard as the perpetrator who planned and executed the crime with calculated coldness. Witness statements from people like Joseph Hine, who saw Richard using the wood chipper during a snowstorm, were considered crucial evidence. Combined with the traces found along the Farmington River, the prosecutor emphasized that Richard's actions were enough to convince them that Helle had been killed and disposed of. Richard's defense lawyer attempted to argue that the evidence was insufficient, claiming that the absence of Helle's complete body raised doubts about the accusation's accuracy. However, the overwhelming evidence left this argument unconvincing. After numerous trial sessions, on November 21, 1989, the jury concluded that Richard Crafts was guilty. This decision marked a milestone in legal history, establishing a precedent that a murder case could be convicted without a victim's body. Richard Crafts was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. During the sentencing, despite facing a severe punishment, Richard remained calm and showed no sign of remorse or emotion. This case shocked the public, not only for its brutal nature, but also for its pioneering legal approach in convicting a murderer without a body. It served as proof of the power of circumstantial evidence and the skill of investigators in piecing together seemingly unrelated clues into a complete picture. The story of Hellycraft's case became a symbol of justice being served even when the clearest evidence was not present. It also served as a cautionary tale about trust, betrayal, and the severe consequences when domestic violence crosses all boundaries. Thank you for following this story. If you enjoyed the video, found it informative, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel so you won't miss future stories. December 25, 2022, in Paju, Gyeonggi Province, South Korea. The silence was broken by a midnight call to the police hotline. A woman's panicked voice, "Please help me. I found a dead body in my boyfriend's closet." The fear in her voice prompted the operator to immediately alert the regional police force. The police arrived quickly at the scene. There they were horrified to find the body of a middle-aged man curled up, wrapped in a thick blanket. Who was the victim, and why was he in the apartment? What was the perpetrator seeking in this older man? Upon closer examination, investigators began to notice signs that this case might not just be a straightforward murder, but rather part of a larger chain of crimes. Will this investigation turn out to be an unexpected journey in crime solving? Subscribe to our channel to explore this mystery with us. Paju, a small city in Gyeonggi Province, South Korea, is known for its serene beauty and fresh air. It's an ideal spot for those looking to escape Seoul's bustling atmosphere. Paju features not only gentle mountains and clear rivers, but also developing modern neighborhoods, creating a subtly blended atmosphere. But behind its peaceful charm, who would have thought that Paju was about to become the center of a horrific crime? A place that once seemed only to hold peace and happiness now hides dark secrets no one could have imagined. This case has shaken Paju and drawn the attention of all of South Korea. Returning to the time the case was discovered, it was Christmas. Kim Ji-ah planned to surprise her boyfriend, Lee Ki-young. They had been dating for almost a year, so she decided to visit his apartment unannounced. Ki-young's apartment was located in an upscale residential area in Paju, where most residents were from the middle and upper classes. The area was famous for its tranquility and privacy, with high-rise buildings, tight security, and modern security systems. Gia had the digital code to the apartment, so she easily entered, but her boyfriend appeared to be out. Gia decided to wait for him, and took the opportunity to tidy up a bit. As she cleaned the living room, Gia noticed the place was messier than usual, with items scattered everywhere. A foul smell lingered in the air. Following the trail, Gia made her way to her boyfriend's bedroom. The smell seemed to be coming from the closet. Out of curiosity, Gia opened one side of the closet door. Instantly, a horrifying sight appeared before her. Behind the neatly hung clothes, something was tightly wrapped in a thick blanket. Gia's hands trembled as she pulled the blanket aside, only to scream in terror when she realized it was the body of a man. He was dead, cold and rigid. Panicked and terrified, Gia backed away and immediately called the police in a frantic voice. The luxurious apartment, a place where one would expect only happy moments, had now become the center of a crime investigation. Upon receiving the report, the police quickly arrived and secured the scene. Investigators meticulously documented every detail, from the apartment entrance to the living room, and finally to the bedroom where the body was discovered. In the living room, there were numerous dry bloodstains hastily wiped away, visible to the naked eye. The quiet space grew tense as they approached the closet. Forensic experts carefully pulled back the blanket wrapped around the body, revealing the corpse of a man showing signs of decomposition. The victim was around 60 years old, with multiple deep open wounds on his body, particularly on the head and face. The wounds seemed to have been caused by a sharp, thin object, likely a knife. The eyes and surrounding areas were heavily bruised, with a swollen forehead and deep cuts stretching from the cheeks to the temples. The bruises indicated the victim might have endured numerous blows before his death. Preliminary examination by the forensic team suggested the cause of death was severe head trauma. The estimated time of death was about 3 to 4 days prior, likely on the night of December 21st or early morning of December 22. Searching around the body, no personal items belonging to the victim were found. No phone, wallet, or ID. It seemed all identifying traces had been deliberately removed. The primary task now was to determine the victim's identity. Coincidentally, that same day, in the nearby city of Ilsan, located just a few dozen kilometers away, a missing person was reported who shared many characteristics with the discovered victim. The report was filed by the son of the missing person, a taxi driver named Park Jung-soo. According to the son's statement, his father, Mr. Park, 60 years old, had not returned home since December 20th. That day, Mr. Park was out driving his taxi as usual, but by the end of the day, he still hadn't come home. Concerned, the son tried calling him, but there was no response. He initially thought his father might have fallen asleep at a friend's house after drinking, so he didn't report it to the police immediately. By the afternoon of December 21st, the family received a strange text message from Mr. Park's phone. The message said that his phone had run out of battery the previous day, which was why he hadn't responded immediately. He added that he would be working far from home and would not return for some time. The message offered no other specific details. In the following days, he continued to send texts home but never picked up any calls. Suspecting something was wrong, particularly since he was not answering calls, the family decided to report it to the police on December 25th. Paju police immediately connected this information with the missing person case, and suspicion began to form. Could the missing man and the body in the closet be the same person? Investigators contacted Mr. Park Jung-soo's son to gather additional information and identifying details. Thanks to the family's detailed descriptions of Mr. Park's height, build, and a small scar on his neck, police initially confirmed that the body in the closet and the missing taxi driver were likely the same person. Through careful DNA testing, the official results were announced. The body in the closet was indeed Mr. Park Jung-soo. Police determined that this was no longer a simple missing person case, but had escalated into a mysterious murder. Police interrogated Kim Ji-ah, the first person to discover the body. She stated that the apartment belonged to her boyfriend, Lee Ki-young. According to her, on the night of December 20th, Lee Ki-young came to her home and invited her entire family to dinner. The event took place at an upscale restaurant, where Lee made a good impression on her family. After the meal, her parents left first, while Lee Ki-young prepared to drive back to his apartment in Paju. However, he had consumed quite a bit of alcohol and showed signs of intoxication. Concerned for his safety, she advised him to call a driver or use a safe driving service. However, Lee Ki-young refused and insisted that he was still able to drive home safely. The tense conversation led to a brief argument. She left disappointed, and Lee Ki-young drove himself home. The following day, on December 21st, Lee Ki-young took the initiative to make amends and apologized for the previous night's argument. He gifted her an expensive pair of couple rings worth 5 million won to show his sincerity. Additionally, he took her shopping and bought her a high-end handbag valued at 60 million won. In total, Lee Ki-young spent about 65 million won in an effort to make peace and mend their relationship. This is why Jia wanted to surprise her boyfriend on Christmas Day, as shown at the beginning of the video. For now, the police confirmed that Lee Ki-young was the prime suspect. But where was he? Jia tried calling him multiple times, but although the phone rang, there was no answer. Police decided to trace his phone to determine his location. The search led them to a bar in the city center, where Lee Ki-young was drinking with friends. In the lively atmosphere of the bar, Lee Ki-young was unaware that the police were closing in. While he was in a drunken haze, a team of officers quietly entered the bar and requested that he come to the police station for questioning. Lee Ki-young was completely caught off guard and unable to react. In the interrogation room, when police asked about the man's body that his girlfriend had found in the closet, he stammered, trying to come up with an excuse but couldn't offer a reasonable explanation. Moreover, the police found the missing taxi driver's mobile phone on him. This was undeniable evidence linking him to the driver's death. Under this pressure, Lee Ki-young finally confessed. he admitted that he had killed the taxi driver, but claimed it was an accident and that the driver had forced him into it. The incident happened on the night of December 20th, when Lee Ki-young hosted a dinner with his girlfriend's family at a luxurious restaurant. During the meal, he drank quite a bit and was clearly intoxicated, but tried to act sober. After her family left, Lee Ki-young insisted on driving home himself, despite his girlfriend's advice to hire a driver. But out of pride and arrogance, he refused and stumbled to his car, leaving the parking lot alone. On the way home, due to the influence of alcohol, he lost control of the wheel, frequently veering across lanes and speeding. At a sharp curve on a narrow road, he suddenly swerved into the opposite lane and collided head-on with an oncoming taxi. The impact was strong, leaving both cars severely damaged. Fortunately, Lee Ki-young was not seriously injured, but the taxi driver, Mr. Park Jung-soo, suffered minor injuries and was disoriented. His car was also heavily damaged. Both men exited their vehicles and began arguing. The taxi driver quickly noticed the strong smell of alcohol on Lee Ki-young. He threatened that if he was not compensated properly, he would report the accident to the police. This was what Lee Ki-young feared most, as he had a prior record related to driving under the influence. In the past, Lee Ki-young had caused a serious accident while driving drunk. The accident happened about 3 years ago when he lost control and crashed into a roadside fence in the outskirts of Incheon. The previous accident didn't cause major injuries, but Lee Ki-young was arrested and fined heavily, and his driver's license was suspended for 100 days. Since then, he has lived in constant fear of being caught driving drunk again, as it could lead to jail time. To settle with the taxi driver and avoid being reported to the police, Lee Ki-young decided to invite him to his apartment. He hoped to negotiate a compensation arrangement at home without involving the law. After bringing the taxi driver to his apartment, Lee Ki-young began discussing compensation to avoid police involvement. To placate him, Lee initially offered a compensation of 1 million won, approximately 760 US. However, the taxi driver, realizing Lee Ki-young was intoxicated, rejected this amount. He felt it was insufficient to cover the damages caused by the accident, as well as the legal risks Lee Ki-young might face. The driver demanded a significantly higher compensation, up to 10 million won, approximately 7,600 US. He explained that if he wasn't fairly compensated, he would report the incident to the police. Lee Ki-young felt angry and tense upon hearing the large sum requested by the driver. However, he tried to remain calm and pretended to agree to the driver's demand to buy time to think and plan. By this point, his intent to kill had already taken root. Pretending to agree, Lee Ki-young asked the driver to wait in the living room while he went to fetch the money. But along with the money, he also concealed a knife. While the driver was counting the money Lee had handed him, Lee Ki-young took advantage of the moment the driver was distracted. He pulled out the knife he had hidden and attacked the man's head and face repeatedly. Caught completely off guard, Park Jung-soo had no time to defend himself. He fell immediately to the ground, overwhelmed by the fatal blows. Once Lee Ki-young confirmed that Mr. Park was dead, he stopped, his hand holding the knife still trembling. The situation had escalated far beyond his initial intent. Lee Ki-young quickly wrapped the body in a large blanket, attempting to conceal all traces of blood and wounds. He stuffed the body into a deep corner of the closet, thinking no one would easily find it, and then proceeded to clean up the crime scene. Since killing the victim was not his initial intention, Lee Ki-young hadn't prepared a plan for dealing with the body. To mislead the driver's family temporarily, he used the victim's phone to send a message to the victim's son, pretending that the driver was still alive and working far away. As for the victim's car, Lee Ki-young drove it to a parking lot about 1 kilometer from the apartment, an area with few passers-by and little attention. There he parked the car in a hidden corner and erased all footage from the dashcam, ensuring no evidence remained that captured him or the victim on that fateful night. However, he hadn't anticipated his girlfriend's surprise visit, which ultimately led to the discovery of his crime. It seemed that the case might be concluding, but as they completed the file, the police uncovered an unusual detail. The apartment was registered under a 50-year-old woman named Kim Moon-jin, not Lee Ki-young. When asked about Miss Kim, Lee Ki-young admitted she was his former lover, but claimed he didn't know her current whereabouts. This immediately raised suspicions among the investigators. Kim Moon-jin, born in 1972, came from a small fishing village in Busan in southern South Korea. She left her hometown at a young age to start a new life in a big city, seeking a stable future. After years of work and saving, she opened a small seafood restaurant Paju and bought herself a luxury apartment, the same one where Lee Ki-young currently resided. Lee Ki-young met Miss Kim at her restaurant. Over time, the two developed feelings for each other, and Lee eventually moved in with her in this apartment, living together as a couple about 2 years ago. But nearly a year ago, neighbors stopped seeing Miss Kim around, and her restaurant closed without explanation. Many were curious, but assumed she had gone abroad for business or moved elsewhere, so they didn't pay much attention. Expanding their investigation, the police discovered that Miss Kim's savings had been entirely withdrawn about 8 months prior, totaling up to 100 million won, around $75,000 USD. All transactions were made via online banking and transferred directly into Lee Ki-young's account. Furthermore, Miss Kim's apartment had been mortgaged by Lee Ki-young to secure a large bank loan, amounting to approximately 150 million won. During questioning, Lee Ki-young offered vague responses about Miss Kim and couldn't explain her current whereabouts. When police mentioned the withdrawn funds, he looked nervous and claimed Miss Kim had asked him to manage her finances. When looking for more clues among Lee's friends, investigators discovered that about 8 months ago, Lee Ki-young frequently hosted lavish parties, generously inviting friends. When asked how he had suddenly come into wealth, Lee explained that he had made a big profit from an investment. The timing of Miss Kim's bank transactions matched precisely with the periods when Lee Ki-young was spending extravagantly. Miss Kim's disappearance, the financial transfers, and testimonies from those around him led police to a hypothesis. Miss Kim may have become a victim of Lee Ki-young's scheme to take over her assets. Since they had no means of contacting Miss Kim, the police decided to conduct a second search of the apartment. Given that Lee had murdered the taxi driver so brutally, it seemed entirely possible he might have killed Miss Kim as well. This time, the police conducted a meticulous inspection of every small corner in the room using luminol, a chemical that reacts with the iron in blood's hemoglobin. When sprayed onto surfaces, if there's residual blood that's been cleaned up, it will glow faintly blue in the dark. As anticipated, in the bathroom, police found multiple traces of blood, even on the ceiling. They immediately collected DNA samples from these blood traces to compare with Ms. Kim Yoon-jin's genetic information. To conduct the DNA matching, a team of investigators traveled all the way to Ms. Kim's hometown in Busan to obtain genetic samples from her family members. It was a long journey, but necessary to confirm if Miss Kim had indeed fallen victim to a crime in her own apartment. The DNA analysis results matched perfectly. The blood sample found on the bathroom wall belonged to Kim Moon-jin. Faced with this DNA evidence, Lee Ki-young had no way out. At first, he tried to appear calm, but under the relentless questioning and irrefutable evidence, he eventually confessed to his crime. According to Lee's statement, about 8 months ago, he invited Miss Kim to drink and, taking advantage of her inebriated state, secretly added sedatives to her glass. Once she lost consciousness, he moved her to the bathroom, where he carried out a brutal murder. He admitted to strangling Miss Kim until she died. To dispose of the body, he used a knife from the house to dismember her in the bathroom, making transportation easier. He then dumped parts of her body in the Han River at various locations, attempting to erase all traces. After committing the crime, Lee closed Miss Kim's restaurant and impersonated her, using her phone to message acquaintances, saying she had gone abroad for business. In this way, he intended to seize all her assets. Beyond the primary motive of seizing assets, there was another reason: their significant age difference. Over time, Lee became more interested in younger women, particularly Kim Ji-ah. He preferred being with her rather than living with someone as old as his own mother. Based on the information provided by the killer, the police attempted to locate Miss Kim's remains, but given the time that had passed, the search was unsuccessful. Once the investigation was complete, Lee Ki-young's case file was sent to the court to prepare for trial. Public outrage was intense over his heinous actions, from murdering Kim Eun-jin for her assets to killing an innocent taxi driver. The trial date was set, and the courtroom was packed with citizens, journalists, and the victims' families. The atmosphere was tense as everyone awaited the verdict for the murderer who had caused such horror. During the trial, the prosecutor presented compelling evidence, from bloodstains on the bathroom walls to financial transactions and detailed testimonies from Lee's current girlfriend. All the evidence pointed to Lee having systematically planned the asset seizure and murder. Based on irrefutable evidence and Lee Ki-young's confession, the jury quickly reached a unanimous conclusion. Lee Ki-young was guilty of premeditated murder, accompanied by violence and asset seizure. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The sentence received public support, with those present feeling somewhat comforted that justice had been served. Though still grieving, the victims' families could be at peace knowing the criminal would no longer pose a threat to society. The trial concluded, marking the end of a shocking and sensational case. Lee Ki-young was returned to prison, where he would spend the rest of his life bearing the weight of his crimes. This story has become a warning about greed and cruelty, reminding us of the severe consequences of inhumane actions. This video ends here. If you found it interesting and informative, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel to explore more stories with us.